Oh, okay, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So thanks to folks who are here joining. Thanks to folks who are here joining virtually. My name is Michelle Rogers. I'm an executive admin here in the Office of Housing, and welcome today for our public meeting for the Pro Housing NOFO grant. We are here today to discuss the Louisville Metro's application for this Pro Housing NOFO. So we're going to cover sort of the key pieces of the grant, sort of what Louisville Metro is proposing, and of course, then take any questions or comments on that. Stephanie, if you're doing the PowerPoint, do you mind to jump to the next slide? Great. So we're of course going to talk a lot more about the grant throughout this meeting and describe a little bit more about the intention of the grant. But in brief, this is a federal grant that Louisville Metro is applying for. The intention of the grant is to remove obstacles to affordable housing. PRO is Pathways to Removing Obstacles. It's a federal HUD grant, and grantees all across the country are applying for this. So it is a competitive grant. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about the details of that, but just to give a little bit of context. The purpose of our meeting today is to share information with all of you about what Louisville Metro intends to apply for, and then take any questions or comments about that. Everyone who is joining us virtually, which is quite a few folks, welcome so much to all of you. Everyone joining virtually has been muted upon entry. At the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions or comments. You can, of course, feel free to unmute at that time. You can also, during the course of the meeting, use the chat feature. That's in the little bubble across the top. Just click chat and drop us a line. If we can, we'll get to those questions during the course of the presentation. And if not, we'll get to them at the end. We'll make sure everyone's comments and questions get addressed. Again, for those who are joining in person, you can ask questions throughout or can ask questions at the end. We are also recording this meeting, so please know this presentation is being recorded. Your questions are being recorded and captured, and that will be shared online afterward. If you happen to be watching this recording afterward and are still interested in sharing public comments with us, we do have about 7 days left in the public comment window. And again, we'll talk more about that. But if you happen to be watching this recording later and want to share public comments with us, please do. So some quick introductions of folks around here, and we'll sort of maybe let folks go down the row here and introduce themselves. Again, my name is Michelle Rogers. I'm an executive administrator in our Office of Housing and Community Development. Next to me is Wendy. Wendy, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, everyone. Wendy Fearberg, Administrative Coordinator for the Office of Housing and Community Development.
We also have some other folks from the Office of Planning.
If you can hear, it's Rachel Casey, Senior Planner with the Office of Planning, and then Joel Dock, Planning Supervisor, is also here as well.
Great. And then I'll also just quickly introduce Stephanie Burdick, and I'm about to turn this presentation over to Stephanie. Stephanie is a consultant that works with us, and she'll speak a little bit more about her role in this process, but she has been a great support to the Louisville Metro Office of Housing and Office of Planning as we have prepared this grant for its presentation. If you would like to, so we're of course going to talk today about what's included in the plan, what the actual proposal is, what are we applying for, and what will we do with it if we get it. But this is a bird's eye view. So if you would like to read our proposal in its entirety, it's about 50 pages long, and you can read that grant online. The link is here, but I think it's a little bit easier to just go to Louisville Metro's website, that's louisvilleky.gov, and just search in our search bar federal plans. That will take you to the right webpage, and you can read about it there. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie Burdick, who has helped us enormously with this grant, to talk through more about what is proposed in this plan.
Thank you, Michelle. Again, as Michelle mentioned, my name is Stephanie Burdick. I'm a consultant that works with the Housing and Community Development Department. And I have had the pleasure of getting to work with them to help prepare this pro-housing NOFO application. If you are familiar with this particular grant application that's been put out by HUD, this is actually the second year that they have put these funds out that are available for entities to apply. And so I had the pleasure of getting to work on their first application last year as well. So what is the Pro Housing NOFO? It is a competitive grant that can be applied for by local and state governments like Louisville Metro, metropolitan planning organizations, or multi-jurisdictional entities to obtain grant funding for the identification and removal of barriers to affordable housing production and preservation. There is what's called a period of performance, which is about a 5-ish plus year period where between in which all the grant activities would occur. There is $100 million available, and cities or entities that are applying can apply for a minimum of $1 million and up to $7 million. So as in the agenda said, we kind of, this application, grant application, and what HUD is looking for Louisville Metro to do and all the applicants to do is to build off of current efforts, prior efforts that has been made by the city in order to reduce barriers to the production of affordable housing. So one of the big things is the mayor's housing strategy, My Louisville Home. So that came out last year. And there is, there's a goal, a housing goal in that My Louisville Home housing strategy of production. And it also talks about removing, in order to produce those units, there needs to be the removal of regulatory barriers, the production of new housing options, and then it encourages private and public partnerships to develop more affordable housing. The housing strategy that the mayor has put out last year really kind of aligns with the goals of this HUD grant. In addition, the Office of Planning has done quite a lot of work regarding the Land Development Code reform project. And so this application will be building off of their work. So some of the things that they have done, they've done quite a lot, and they can speak more to that if there's questions, but in summary, they've put out work that it discusses racial equity and removing barriers to equitable development. There was a resolution that was passed in 2020 by Louisville Metro Council that requested the Planning Commission and thus the Office of Planning to review the Land Development Code and develop recommendations so that there's more equitable and inclusive development. They put out a story map in 2021 that talks about the systematic racism in the development of Louisville and how to address and this as part of the LDC reform. The Land Development Code reform, like I said, started as part of that council resolution. It began in the summer of 2020 and has, we're in October of 2024, and work has been going on for these past 4 years and continues to go on. So the purpose of the reform project is to revise the land development code to be consistent with the comprehensive plan of the Plan 2040. And there is a whole website that discusses the land development code reform efforts and what the Office of Planning is hoping to achieve and what they've done thus far. In addition, as part of, like I said, that reform efforts that has started in 2020, they have had over 300 unique meetings, conversations, workshops, speaking engagements that have addressed the land development code reform project in general, but also includes numerous sessions that are unique to middle housing, which is a component of our pro-housing NOFO application. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but you could see there's been a number that have either been completed or been ongoing, multiple per year for the past couple of years. As part of the land development code reform project, there has been some approved amendments to the land development code. These are what those are. And part of the pro-housing NOFO application desires to continue these efforts that have been completed by the Office of Planning. So to get into what the Office of Housing and Community Development and the Office of Planning is placing into our application in our funding request. So we are requesting the full $7 million. And we propose to spend that in two ways, two activities, with a split of $4 million, essentially to be handled through the Office of Planning to allow them to increase their capacity to continue with their land development code reform efforts. The other $3 million will be administered through the Office of Housing and Community Development in order to develop affordable housing demonstration style projects, which will be showcasing either middle housing and or factory built housing. Middle housing and factory built housing are land development code amendments that the Office of Planning has been working on and has been working on getting community engagement and feedback, and then also getting those passed in order to amend the land development code. And so it's the intention to kind of build off of that effort. So to talk a little bit more about each of those activities, the $4 million, again, is to hire consultants for the land development code reform. As you saw, that land development code effort started in 2020 and has been ongoing for 4 years. And in order to really make the impact desired and to address some of the barriers to obtaining to developing more affordable housing within Louisville Metro, more amendments need to be passed. There was a list of amendments. There's about a handful of them, and there's just more that needs to occur. And in order to hiring consultants will provide increased capacity to that Office of Planning in order for them to hopefully get more of the LDC reform amendments passed. So the consultant will be doing a lot of engagement and outreach, but also research relative to them, drafting the amendments, starting on looking at middle housing options, and passing amendments, hopefully passing amendments related to that. The first slide identified there's no match requirement as part of this grant, and that is true. There is leverage you can provide, and so we are providing leverage to our activities. And so this particular activity will have $1.5 million of Metro funds that are considered leverage. Again, the development of affordable housing is proposed to be a $3 million activity. We want to focus on demonstration projects where, again, they would be either showcasing middle housing development. So think duplex, triplex, pocket neighborhood, that type of thing, and or factory built housing. So we could do something that's factory built and middle and a duplex, or one or the other. Again, leaving some flexibility there. To be built on Metro-owned properties. There's some efforts to look at land banco properties and other properties that the city owns and use those also as leverage for the development of these projects. Units will have to be available to low to moderate income individuals, and they'll either be for home ownership or rental. And the Office of Housing Community Development will, issue a solicitation of interest or put out a NOFO for developers to apply for these funds. So can you submit comments? Yes, you can. You can submit them via email, via mail, or we will finish up this presentation, and then we'll take comments then as well. So here's the contact information on how to submit comments. And again, if you are looking to see the draft, it is available. Here's the ways to obtain the draft. And with that really concludes our overview of our application. And we will take comments or questions at this time. And I do want to thank everyone for coming and attending. We do really appreciate it.
Particularly formal if folks have questions, comments. Also folks online, if anybody wants to come off mute or drop a question in the chat, we'd be happy to talk more about it, go into a little more detail with what the proposals are, how we think that'll play out. Like Stephanie mentioned, it's competitive. So we did apply for this once before, and we're not awarded. We were close, but we're not selected. Of the hundreds of applicants throughout the country, we were not one of the ones selected. So we've gotten some good feedback. We've made some changes. We've made some adjustments, and this is our second attempt, and we think we have a pretty strong application. So any questions or clarification, we'd be happy to kind of go over any of those or comments.
So a couple.
Sure.
One, will you make those slides available for us?
Yeah, absolutely.
The second question, relative to timeline and administration of it, if we are awarded, is that going to flow through, for instance, the Louisville Cares? Is that going to flow through Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or is that going to be in function of the internal, housing department itself?
Sure. Good question. So for folks online, just in case anybody couldn't hear, the question was, if we are awarded the fund, the SOI to actually construct the units, who's going to sort of manage that project? I don't think we have a clear, exact, certain answer right now, but I think the way we've talked about it so far, we envision it to be similar to the Office of Housing NOFO process. So where developers come in sort of on a roughly annual basis to apply through the Office of Housing process. Now, it's not off the table that it might instead go through trust fund or might instead go through the CARES program. But right now it's been discussed to go through the Office of Housing.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I've got a couple questions.
Yeah, please.
And then I'll stop and I'll have more. I wanted to ask, so I heard about the 2019 report, racial equity report on housing, and then the anti-displacement ordinance. So I've got two questions. I want to know the status of the anti-displacement, implementation of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted to also ask about the racial equity toolkit and if that's going to be applied in any way to, the creation of incentives for this, or, assuming this is awarded, how that would interface?
Yeah, great questions. I can speak to those a little bit, and then Stephanie or anybody else that would like to add. So the question is, some of the slides talk about two tools, specifically the anti-displacement ordinance and the racial equity toolkit. How does that play into all of this work? I'll speak first to the anti-displacement ordinance, which is that the Office of Housing has been working very closely, very regularly with a team out of Boston University to develop that tool. And the intention of the tool is that a proposed development could be input into the tool. 123 Maple Street, a fourplex is proposed development, and you can run a super data heavy test essentially on that development to show what's the risk of displacement of that development. That is intended to go before council before the end of this calendar year, probably before Thanksgiving, for final passage. Once it is passed, it will then be in place for any future proposed development that will receive a Metro subsidy. So that would likely include this demonstration project. So what that would look like is once we have proposed developments, any proposed development and the details of those proposed developments would go through that racial equity toolkit to determine, through that anti-displacement toolkit to determine what's the risk of displacement of this development, and then additional decisions would be made based on that. So I guess all that to say, we anticipate that being available and to be used when these developments are undertaken. The second question about the racial equity toolkit, Louisville Metro Office of Housing has started taking as a regular practice with its NOFO applicants that their application has to sort of be filtered through the racial equity toolkit. And so that is considered when any housing developments of any kind are funded with Louisville Metro funds. It does go through that racial equity toolkit practice with sort of whatever the results are at the end, get included in any decisions made to fund or not fund the project.
And the Office of Planning does the same things I'm talking about, so they can
No,
hear
please,
me.
yeah.
The Office of Planning does the same thing with our amendments to the Land Development Code. We like to take all of those through the racial equity toolkit as well to make sure that we're not missing anything, and make sure that the amendment has been very well thought through before it's taken to the Planning Commission or taken to Metro Council.
I would just chime in to say that the application itself from HUD asks for Louisville Metro to respond to these questions. So it talks about anti-displacement. It asks about how we're going to consider that as part of our activities that are going to be funded with these funds. It talks about racial equity. There's questions regarding that. So even just the actual application takes that also into consideration. And so that this is mindful on their minds as part of, and so as a result, we have to respond to that and lay out how we intend to, apply these things that we have. And thankfully, we have these tools that are available to us. So.
Yeah,
And just Michelle or Wendy, can you make sure that we're getting names of those that are commenting for that are here in person for because we'll need that for public comment. Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Sheet with everyone's names, and we'll take a note of the questions that were asked. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Stephanie. I do quickly want to ask, we did have a question come into the chat, which is, do you have a consultant you wish to hire, or will it go out to bid? And I'll let the planning department speak to that.
It would go out to bid. Probably we would do it in there's different names for it. The housing uses NOFO or solicitation of interest. We generally call it request for proposals because they will have a set price on it of whatever of the funding amount that is awarded. And so we'll put out a request for proposals and it will be evaluated just like any other solicitation of interest or RFP that Metro Government has. So there'll be scoring criteria and various things like that to select a consultant. We don't have anyone specific in mind.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Robin. Another question here?
Yeah, I think it's more of a comment than it is a question.
Sure.
I would just would like to suggest, and certainly I know that the overall submission to HUD for this grant is going to be sensitive to some of the information that I believe should be included. But I don't want it to get overlooked locally when we're talking about incentivizing or creating an opportunity for infill development. One of the things that we certainly understand is that larger developments, for the most part, smaller developers cannot participate in, right? And generally what has happened when we've had these opportunities, that it is still the larger developers that potentially end up winning because they're making more of an impact because of the size of their developments. So I don't want to miss the opportunity for Louisville Metro, particularly with outside funds being leveraged, particularly through HUD, to incentivize, diversity in the developers, right?
Yeah.
Either that's through the solicitation process or through the NOFO, similar to what KC did with their QAP, right? Where they incentivized, if it was a major developer that was going after federal dollars, that they got additional points if it was a scoring, if they partnered with minority developers, right? And that was very impactful in bringing diversity into 9% deals. So I think that would be something that would be worth looking at when you guys get ready to structure those types of offerings.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great comment, and is not something that has that has not been thought about by the Office of Housing. I think that's just in general, that's a thing that we realize is a limitation, I guess, for lack of a better word, that we do see these same big players being awarded year after year, and it's because we're using a universal scoring criteria for developers of all sizes or experience levels or areas of specialty. And so together with this, but also separate from this, it's something that we're talking about a lot. How do we, diversify the developers that we work with to work with, different kinds of developers all across the community? So yeah, thank you. That comment's well received. Yeah.
I have another comment.
Yeah.
Someone online.
Please, yeah.
You all may or may not be aware, but I've filed a complaint with Ethics Commission, and it includes my concerns about how the awards were made to MMY last year, where they've received $1.5 million in city subsidies for the modular housing factory. The Ethics Commission is supposed to determine next week whether for that to go to a hearing. So it's kind of two parts. One is, how is that potentially going to affect this? The second is, I'm really concerned that what I'm reading is, this, without saying it directly, I mean, this seems to really kind of set MMY up for being the or one of the primary developers. My real concern last year was that the incentives, there was a lot of political pressure to make those incentives available. They got created without having a real just process for creating incentives. So what's the process going to be for creating incentives before determining, the awardees? I'm just, again, kind of going back to this really is sort of setting it on a trajectory that's going to lead out small developers. It doesn't look quite as focused on infill. It seems really kind of targeted to further support MMY. So I can speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I have a couple thoughts. I don't want to hog the floor if anybody else.
The only thing that I would want to say is that, we are considering part of the piece with regards to the demonstration project talks regarding having available, is using Metro-owned property, and Metro-owned property is a lot of land bank-owned property, and those land bank-owned lots that are, single or multiple individual lots that are within a neighborhood. So that is, smaller lot size, where you can have, be awarded, multiple developers can get awarded for doing multiple different lots, or it's just, that's infill development, right? Because that's where the lots are. So, but Michelle, go ahead.
So I guess to sort of speak to your first question about if there's an ethics complaint that continues, it goes to hearing, and that there's complications that arise from that, how will that impact this? I think that's hard. That's hard to speak to the details other than just to say, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and we'll address any concerns like that come up. And as trying to sort of speak clearly here, when we get there, we will do the best that we can with whatever the situation presents itself. The other piece that I want to say is we actually went through, this team went through and edited the document, change it from modular to factory built for specifically that reason. So we've changed language, and it probably still says modular in there a time or two, but we've gone through and tried to be really intentional about not saying that these are specifically going to be modular and only modular, because we don't want to in this draft show any kind of preference up front for one specific producer of factory built housing. So there's nothing for us that says, oh, we already know it's going to be MMY and we know that that's how that's going to go. We don't know that at all. We're exploring a lot of different factory built options, and when that comes up, when that NOFO process or that SOI comes up, all applicants will be evaluated via the same criteria. So if MMY chooses to apply, that's great, but any applicants will be evaluated on the same kind of criteria based on the SOI selection process. So we're trying to be intentional that it's not modular, it's factory built, and it's not MMY. That's not a guaranteed thing by any means.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I would want to say is that, part of this grant is to identify barriers that, and then respond to those barriers, right? To the production of affordable housing. So there's a variety of different barriers that we've identified in this application to the production of affordable housing. And one of them, quite frankly, is time. The time that it takes to go from, to get a project built. And so the reason we, included a component about trying to have a factory built housing demonstration project was that would be responsive to the barrier of just the time that it takes to build housing. And so we have a housing need, and the need can get worse as time goes on. And so to respond as quick as possible is desirable. And then in addition to that, we have also, the planning department has presented an amendment to land development code to provide some more equitable language regarding the development of factory built housing within the city. So again, that's not the only barrier that we have to affordable housing development. But it's one of them. And so that's the tie-in there. And, like I said, we might not have any applicants that desire to use that in that manner. And we're, and that's how it will be. We'll be kind of beholden to the developers and what they come in and how they want to be creative with the goals that we've set. So I hope that helps to address the question.
We have a couple of comments coming in. One from Evan Kerr. Could planning explain what tasks the Land Development Code Diagnosis Committee would be assigned, assuming they receive funding? I understand that middle housing reform is a big step in the LDC reform process, and I'm wondering how increasing the team via consultants will expedite the process. So I'll, sort of let planning address that, and then Stephanie, if you have additional comments.
So there is the list in the grant if you want to read it. There's a list of specific amendments. It won't be limited just to those specific amendments, but the specific amendments that are listed in the grant come from 2 studies that have been done. One was a study, the first study in 2021, the Land Development Code diagnosis that was done by Opticos Design. There's still some remaining amendments from that initial diagnosis that need to be addressed. And then we also, the Office of Planning just released a study called the Housing and Mixed Use Development Study. And there are several amendments that are recommended in that study, and those will be included as well. You think just a few of the highlights are changing the way that we measure building height in the Land Development Code, looking at different policies to increase building height along corridors and along our major commercial nodes and areas, as well as, like you said, getting middle housing through increasing some residential density allowances in some of our multifamily districts. So there is a full list in that draft of the grant if you want to look at it. But I think the intention of having the consultant to help us expedite it is that right now we are approaching this on a single amendment by amendment basis. And the hope is that having increased capacity with a consultant will allow us to create a more comprehensive approach to the amendment process so that we can get several amendments done at once instead of doing it on a one-off basis. Okay, we've done this one, now we got to do the next one, now we got to do the next one. And the hope is that maybe instead of that, we could have a comprehensive approach that says, here's 10 amendments at the same time, and they all relate back to housing production and affordable housing, allowing more affordable housing throughout Louisville Metro. And we could do it sort of all at once rather than on this piecemeal basis.
Yeah, I think I would sort of echo Stephanie's comment about how one of our most scarce resources is time. We know that we today have a huge gap in housing availability and housing need. And so everything that we can do to expedite that process, doing a lot of things Rachel said, grouping things together, passing things sort of in bulk to move things more quickly. Anything we can do to increase the housing supply more quickly is worth pursuing. I see we have a hand from Michael Gross. Michael, feel free to come off mute and ask your question if you'd like.
You should be coming.
Yeah, hi. A question. One of the things that seems to be missing from this is both combating NIMBYism and not just in the general public for affordable housing, but also through our Metro Council and either state governments. The missing middle is kind of one of the reasons.
Hyper meetings.
Apologies, Michael.
Sorry. Michael, we were saying we only caught the first half of your thought there. We heard, to speak more about how this may or may not be combating NIMBYism and sort of the perception of both the general public and our policymakers. But we lost you for the second half of your thought.
Well, it's not only just the general public, but also our Metro Council and even the state government, using House Bill 388 as an example, which pretty much stopped the middle housing in its tracks. Well, it didn't really stop it, but stopped any implementation of it, which seems to be one of the things that you're leaning into in this. So I was just wondering how that is going to be addressed through this process. And also in the draft that was put out, it seems to be missing Exhibit B. It says not applicable to public comment, but that's supposedly where any of the changes, proposed changes that are going to be made are supposed to be listed, I think, unless I read it wrong.
So the exhibit B is all the some of the standardized forms that the city has to submit that have to go to the mayor for signature. So essentially like an intent to apply type form. So that's why those aren't included. I believe when you were reading regarding the changes, that would be if we got awarded these funds and then determined that we would need to make changes, those would be in there. If and then in addition, we will have to respond to comments so that people have made within the application. So these comments here and our responses to them will be a part of that. And then also any written responses. In regards to the beginning of your question, one of the things that the application, right, like what you have to do is like identify your barriers and how are you going to remove the barriers. So one of the the largest there's a lot of barriers that we have, right? We have a variety of different ones. And the House bill most certainly is a barrier that we discuss in the application. The application asks regarding, who the stakeholders are and how we've engaged them. And one of the other things we talk about engagement of, that education and outreach, not only to, public in general, but more targeted outreach to those that are elected officials, and those that are elected officials and the public in areas with independent zoning authority within Louisville Metro, within the county, is vital. I mean, that's part of what we have to do in order to, be successful with these funds. So there's like we said, there's a 5-year period of performance, and part of that 5-year period is, designed to have increased capacity to allow the Office of Planning staff to have these important discussions and hopefully make impact and change minds, right? So that's, that's part of it. And we recognize that is, most certainly a big barrier and a big task. And we can't make the progress that we want to make as quickly or as an impactful manner without everyone kind of working together towards this goal. So that's most certainly included in that application. Regarding the development side, again, focusing on Metro-owned properties, those will, ideally be suitable by the time that they're ready for development for middle housing development in its current state. So they'll be zoned for multifamily and we'll be prepared for that. So the hope is that, those barriers have been taken away by the time that we get to the point where we are looking to do, a NOFA or an SOI to award those funds and build those demonstration projects. The one thing that mixed housing and mixed use housing and mixed use project and study that the planning department, Rachel was discussing, they talk it talks a lot about, you know, the various amendments that's recommended. But one of the things and the takeaways in addition to that was to have demonstration projects, that having built demonstration projects of products, housing products that the community has not seen, that has not been built in the community in abundance for a long period of time, can be helpful in having success with getting some of the amendments approved. And so we're really, really hoping that, you know, having these demonstration projects can kind of work hand in hand with that. I don't know if Rachel or Joel have any other additional comments regarding those, you know, regarding that, but or, you know, understanding we're understanding of those barriers, and that we're going to have to work really hard to make a larger scale impact for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's no good answer to how to combat the NIMBYism that exists in the community. There's no silver bullet for that. But the best thing that we can do is focus on education and engagement. And again, as Stephanie was talking about on demonstration, I think our goal would be to have some of these demonstration projects in communities that have a lot of this type of NIMBYism going on. Again, that will be limited to, you know, what the Metro-owned property availability is, but I think that that's an intention. If we can show how these types of housing fit into these communities, then that's one of the ways that we can try to combat that. And then I think the other piece of it is that if some of the heavy lifting of research and drafting of amendments can be taken off of Office of Planning staff, it opens up a lot more time for Office of Planning staff to go out and be on the ground doing a lot of the education and engagement that we would like to be doing. And so I think that that's kind of, at least that is what we've written into the grant as our ways to sort of combat that barrier. Like I said, it's just, you know, our ideas and our attempt. It's a thing that people are struggling with all across the country, and nobody has one exact right way to do it. We kind of have to see what we can do in our own community and tailor it to our own community.
On the same line, Michelle, this is you had mentioned the anti-displacement ordinance and that you thought that was going to be presented back to Metro Council. You know, on the face, the ordinance that was passed seemed very anti-affordable housing. I was just wondering if the public was going to get a chance to see what is being proposed to Metro Council before it goes through again.
It is planned to be presented to Metro Council before the end of the year. I would have to get back to you on the opportunity or what that looks like for public input. I think something that's been discussed a lot with the tool is if there's any kind of development that is going to actually improve or reduce the risk of displacement, it's going to be, you know, federally subsidized affordable housing. That potentially a part of the tool that needs to sort of be reconsidered is right now the only developments that are proposed that they have to go through that tool are the ones that are receiving Metro subsidy, which requires affordability, which sort of, you know, is in conflict. That it's like those are actually the developments that are the least likely to cause displacement. So there's some opportunity for some continued debate there and some continued tweaking. But I'd have to get back to you on what the opportunity for public comment looks like in that process.
It's just on the tool, not the whole ordinance, right?
Correct, just on the tool. Yeah, just on the tool and the passage of the tool. Correct.
I have a few comments, but I think Martina had that first.
Yeah, please,
Well,
Martina.
this is Martina Cunegie, Neighborhood Planning and Preservation. So one thing I want to clarify, this has been billed as a public comment meeting, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And so I think it would be helpful to note how many people are participating on this meeting And then how many people are actually from the community as MPP is. We're not going to be building anything. We're not going to ask for a TIF. We're not going to be, we're advocating for the community in terms of genuine affordable housing. So it would be interesting to know, and I've been confused under people, of course I'm old, but under people, sometimes it says 15, sometimes it says 1. So I think before this meeting ends, it would be good to identify who's on the line and who's participating in this conversation. Also, one of our community partners texted me a long time ago, and I apologize to this person. They text me to say, let them know people are having trouble logging on through Teams. I don't know what that means, but, and then they've provided me the screen that they're getting. So they're being told the site is temporarily unavailable. So just to let you know that some folks in the community that are interested in this conversation have not been able to engage. So a couple of comments. I noticed that the intent of the grant, and I apologize, I have not read all I needed to read before I came to this meeting today. But the intent of the grant also included the notion of preservation. So I'm curious as to why redevelopment of our existing middle housing apparently is not part of this mix. From our point of view, there's a lot of existing middle housing already. We're so thrilled that Planning Department has made this an issue to raise the issue of smaller housing opportunities for folks in the community. I happen to live in the West End, but I used to live in Clifton. I used to live in Old Louisville. I used to live in a lot of places where if I walk through those places today, which I frequently do, because MPP is helping neighborhoods all over East, West, and South, there's a lot of middle housing that sits empty and undeveloped. This also means a missed opportunity for smaller developers who cannot compete with these big developers that are always looking to bring in these massive housing developments. It's a missed opportunity for the smaller developers if we're not considering redevelopment. This is also a pathway to dealing with the NIMBYism issue that we're always talking about. I have to tell you, as an African American, I get a little annoyed when racial equity is suddenly a big issue, when we have so many smaller units in the community that smaller developers, minority developers could perhaps put their teeth into in terms of bringing that middle housing back to life. So these are some of the issues I'd like to put out on the table. And then also the issue of this public meeting. We need to make sure when you submit this grant that this meeting is represented properly, that it was not a situation where most of the people online were either staff or developers that are looking at this as a source of funds, and not enough people in the community that are giving reasonable feedback about, you know, what we really need in this community.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So just to sort of reiterate for some folks online, couple points. One, we have a lot of representation here. I was sort of joking earlier that I've done some public meetings in the past, and we're lucky if we get 2 people in attendance. It feels like a big turnout. Versus here, we have 15 folks online and about 6 in the room. So we're very appreciative and aware of the level of engagement. I think that's a very important thing to note. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to speak just quickly to your point about sort of what this is proposing. Potentially bigger developments, new demonstration projects, as opposed to working with smaller developers on existing units that need a rehab. So new development as opposed to preservation. I'll speak to that just a little bit, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, please do. I think it gets a little bit to maybe 2 things. First is we focused a lot on what is the data telling us and what are the recommended strategies telling us. So the planning department has worked a lot with different kinds of data groups and consultant groups to produce some reports that share some best strategies. And one of those best strategies is a demonstration project and new build demonstration and factory built housing. So how that connects. So that's what we're leaning into here. I think the other piece of that is that if we have additional resources to do that kind of development, it then frees up some of the resources that we would have been using to do that kind of development for other kinds of development. For example, smaller developers, smaller, more preservation focused. We have a lot of different preservation programs, some of which have been more abundant than others. And so, but I think that's a very good point, that we do have that housing in the community that needs to be preserved and needs to be rehabbed, and that the addition of these resources makes some of that more available moving forward. I don't know if other folks have anything they want to add on that. Stephanie or anybody here in the room from planning has anything to add on sort of the choice to do factory built new development, new construction of a demonstration project as opposed to rehab.
I think you've answered it adequately. I just wanted to go on the record about that, because that is a big, big issue as far as MPP is concerned.
Sure.
That we keep missing that opportunity, and that we recognize that big developers in this community, they have been steering this conversation for much too long, because not enough people like me will show up at these meetings to say, hold it, we're missing some big opportunities here for small developers.
Yeah, I think there's just one more piece I wanted to add to that, which is that that's part of what we're trying to do by passing the middle housing legislation. Obviously, that's going to allow people to build new, and we want that. But a part of it is that a lot of this existing middle housing, because of zoning, because of what our predecessors in planning and zoning have done, is take a lot of that middle housing that exists and zoned it down to single family. So now it's non-conforming, or it doesn't fit the zoning that's there right now. And so if we can create regulations for those middle housing units to be in compliance with zoning, then it's a lot easier for somebody to look at it and say, hey, here's a middle housing unit. I'm not scared to buy this and rehab it now, because I'm not afraid that zoning's going to come after me because it's not allowed. And so I think that that's a piece that we're trying to do. There's a lot of pieces to it. There's funding pieces, but there's also this regulatory piece as well.
And Martina and for the group, Joel Knott with Louisville Metro Office of Planning. I really appreciate your comments on the public meeting that we're having right now, because if we do this grant right, if we carry out this work right, it will be a continuation of what we've done under the Land Development Code reform, and acknowledging that public engagement can be worthless. And we have to do it differently, and we have to do it right. We have to go out to communities. We hold library hours. We build with Legos. You've attended some of these things. So it's about doing things differently and going to the communities to say, we are in the community. We want you to know who we are as planners. We don't hide downtown. And we want to know what folks want and need now, and what we can do to help. And the middle housing piece of the puzzle is an acknowledgement of, one, it's illegal and it exists. And because it was made illegal, it is now missing in our suburban areas, where it very much is what we look to that creates great neighborhoods. And so the commentary about, is there a mechanism to say, look, there's all this middle housing that's becoming legal now. And the problem in the past is nobody wants to invest in that, because you're going to come down here and try and pull a building permit, and they're going to say, no, it's own single family. You can do a single family, or you can go upstairs and try and establish back in 1971 that you existed, and that's very difficult to do. By putting middle housing into the wall, into the Land Development Code, it makes those legal. It gives people an opportunity to come down here and renovate those and rehab those. And I think it would be extremely beneficial to add some provisions for rehabilitation of middle housing units that become legal as a part of a demonstration for small builders and small contractors, because a lot of the work that we've done this past year, and we've had conversations at the Urban Design Studio, is about building small developer capacity, minority developer capacity. We've worked with the Minority Contractors Association of Kentuckiana to try and get them more involved. But it's about recognizing that if you're a contractor or a building and you live in a community and you see that vacant lot and that vacant lot and that vacant lot, and you want to do something about it, you should be able to do something about it as a small builder or a small contractor in your community. And middle housing gives that opportunity.
Hey, Joel, if I could go a little bit further, obviously speaking from experience here, right? Because all of those things have come to play in our maturation cycle, right? where we have went into a community, identified what the need is, understood that we had a greater opportunity to be more impactful on every level of development if we did smaller developments, right? But then you run into situations where you buy a multifamily, it's a 5-plex. You realize that it's too damaged to be rehabbed, so you want to put another 5-plex back, so you tear it down based on recommendations. But then you come back and find out, oh, well, you can't put that 5-plex back, right? Now you have to do a duplex, which means you got to go back to all of your financial organizations that you work with, and now they're looking at you like, oh, well, can you perform or can't you, right? So, and then there's a whole point of the financial aspect of it too, right? Because when you're dealing with small developers, we do not have the cash flow, right, to overcome some of these barriers. And these things continue to stack up, right? Because then you got code enforcement involved, then you have taxes, then you have holding costs, all the time that you're trying to figure out how to produce affordable housing that the community really, really needs, right? So it's almost counterintuitive. So I appreciate all the conversations that are being had right now, and the fact that people are really starting to lean towards what needs to be the solutions, not just for the city, but also for the community, and also mobilizing a workforce that has, quite frankly, been very self-taught on how to perform in this market. When you had reduction of interest rates, there were a lot of people that entered into this market that are really, really good at rehabbing houses, right? They will be really, really good at producing middle housing for this city and for their communities, right? But we have to have opportunities, one, that we stand up for them, that we don't shy away from them, that we engage with them. And then we also understand from a development and an experience point of view that we know these are the things that they're going to run into. So what are we going to do to ensure that this is not a hindrance to what should be a all-in effort, right, in order to address this exacerbating housing gap that we have.
Yeah, that's
Very
really
good.
helpful.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Got a series of comments. It's okay.
sure, yeah.
I've been quiet over here, kind of not like me. I mean, just first, I would like just to commend the Office of Planning and Office of Housing and Community Development on the focus of this plan and the activities for equitable land development code reform, continuing moving that discussion forward, and to create more affordable housing units across the entire Louisville area, especially in affordable housing deserts. And I think there are several ways here that I have listed that I think might strengthen the application a little bit, or at least add to kind of some of the arguments. Is there are some missing reports. So we are suffering as a community from an unupdated health equity report. We keep relying on the 2011 and the 2017 reports. The last one was supposed to be released in 2022. It did not get released. An executive summary was released at some point this year, but there is an effort to rewrite it, from my understanding, in this administration, and that's problematic because it was about to be released at the end of 22. So I'd like some answers to that, if we can figure out what that is, because relying on 13 and 7-year-old data at this point, we need updated data. The other is kind of self-indulgent, but the state of metropolitan housing report is at no point mentioned in here. One example is the section on flooding and increased flooding potential in areas. We wrote a 2023 report on climate change and housing. So please try to reference that and take from that to help support this application. Agree with what Michael brought up, maybe a few others, about the Kentucky State Legislature and not only House Bill 388, but House Bill 18 on source of income protections being eliminated. There are multiple efforts at the state level that are encroaching on our ability to do anything at the local level. So we need to really kind of broaden that context a little bit. The other, well, there's multiple others, sustainable building development, like, it is crucial to the current health and efficiency of our housing. Those building practices will contribute to improved housing and utility affordability, physical and mental health outcomes overall, and economic benefits as well. So we don't see much at all sustainable building practices in there. Two other things, the community partnerships. I think there's a dearth of any kind of mention of community partners in here. It's kind of as if sometimes this was done in a vacuum. And we know that a lot of community partners have been involved in this process, thinking accessory dwelling units, thinking middle housing. I think that would strengthen this as well to show it's a community effort to actually make this happen. The other thing is that we talk about home rule cities and independent cities, but current annexation efforts are a huge conversation, and they're going to have huge impact over the next several years here. For example, the current conversation in the proposed city of Eastwood, that's 20 square miles of land. That's 5% of Metro's land is being proposed to create areas of exclusion. That's 2 times the size of Jeffersontown, the current largest city, I think. So that's problematic. And when I sit in meetings in Eastern Jefferson County, most recently the Johnson Road MRDI development conversation, where there was a turnout of city of Eastwood supporters who were trying to get a petition signed, and they say outright at the table next to me, they can build that affordable housing downtown. They cannot build it out here. There is no need for them to build it out here. We don't want it out here. So the NIMBYs, the cave people, they've all gone bananas. They're all here, and they're still speaking with a loud voice and showing up and saying no, 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 when we got to find ways to say yes. And it infuriates me when I go to those meetings and hear that, and I hear that quite often. The last thing I want to mention is it's the historian coming out into here, but the section on page 1920, when you talk about the history of racial segregation, it says racial segregation in Louisville can be traced back as far as 1914. I think we need to contextualize that better because it goes way back before 1914. And just as the historian is coming out of this, we really need to broaden that viewpoint just a little bit more. And I know we're trying to do that from a planning and kind of.
It's you know exactly where 1914 comes
I know
from.
exactly where 1914
It's where
comes
we
from.
start our confronting racism story map and
Yeah.
the xenophobia and the things that happened in the Enterprise,
Xenophobia
in Triangle, and Black Monday, and all that stuff.
We can talk Bloody Monday. We can go back to 55. We have a long history that we can really contextualize there. And so these are all important things. I said, especially that community partner aspect is a very important thing to think about. And I was going to say the anti-displacement assessment tools is critical as well to know what that's going to look like, how it's going to be applied, and how people can review that before it's implemented. So thanks for listening to my comments.
Yeah, that's all super helpful. That's all really helpful. I think you've given us a lot of different ways we can sort of, take a look at this and things that might be missing that would just bolster it. So not necessarily, a huge change in what's proposed, but just ways to bolster like the community partnerships you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's very helpful.
I think the support that we've gotten from AARP over the last several years and other organizations should absolutely be noted if it's not in there. And then also to Tony's point about the state of metropolitan housing report, Metropolitan Housing Coalition also did a specific report on middle housing in collaboration with the Center for Health Equity that we should probably note also.
And I would say this will be after it goes in though, but the 2020, what year is it? 24?
Yeah, it's 2020.
Whatever it is right now, the state of Metropolitan Housing report for this year will be zoning and land use focused. So that will come out in December.
Great.
So that might be too late for submittal. I don't remember when this is.
Oh, this gets submitted like next week.
Next week.
So yeah,
Okay.
we'll be included in that.
It'll be there to help out.
The larger context. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much. I did want to read the comment that we have here on the screen that says, it's from Robin Hall, and it says, I'm a Louisville resident who is against how the housing program has come about. I have been in construction business for over 25 years and find that what is taking place is for the larger developers who are spending thousands of dollars to push their agenda. We do need changes, but this is not going to benefit the small developer. So yeah, thank you, Robin. We appreciate that comment. And I think that's sort of in keeping with some of the other comments we've heard. So yeah, thank you so much. I'll also just remind folks again, anybody who's here online, or of course anybody who's here in person, that just even when we conclude the meeting, it's still not the end of the public comment period. So you still have until October 15th to send us your comments for that public comment period. We appreciate and are taking in and taking note of all these comments, and we'll absolutely make some changes and adjustments and sort of bolster the application a little bit more as a response to these comments that have been received.
Can you remind me, I know there's a timeline in it, but when do we expect to hear back after submittal on awards?
I think relatively quickly. So the period of performance starts in February. February of next year. And so we would hear about it. I don't know if they'll give us a long window before or a short window before, but our period of performance would start in February of 25 and continue through September of 2030. So we'll hear in this. Yeah.
I was just going to say that last year when we applied, again, had a very similar application. The period of performance was supposed to start in January of 24, and they made announcements in June of 24. So, HUD has their own timeline, and I think it depends on a lot of variety of different factors as to if that actually gets awarded close to that or not. So, and then I wanted to just confirm the date that the public comment period ends. So
And a little bit before that. Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna say, thanks, Stephanie. I think I said the 15th, but the public comment period probably closes a day or two before that and gets submitted on the 15th. So my apologies.
It does, and I
Will it end on a weekend? I mean, like, what's the?
Stephanie will pull up for it here. I got.
Yeah, and so the comment period will end the 11th,
Which is this Friday. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification, Stephanie. Louisville Metro will submit on the 15th, which is a Tuesday, which means we have a couple of days in our weekend, which we won't accept things at that point. And so, as of close of business on the 11th, this one will accept comments on this.
We'll close.
Well, as we wait to see if there are any final comments, I just want to say thanks to Stephanie for the presentation, and also thanks so much to everybody for being here. I'm very appreciative for the community engagement, the engagement of both community members and developers, different kinds of feedback on this program, other programs. So thank you so much for those who came. If there are any other questions,
say one last
please.
thing.
Yeah.
One of our community partners said, did you let them know on the record that we weren't able to access it online? So I did let you know.
Yes.
This will be available online for
Yes.
people to view. And so thanks for confirming that there's plenty of time to reply. If you have any handouts, I think everything's going to be online available to the public.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. So a couple things will happen after this meeting. We've recorded this meeting, and so the recording will be uploaded online. So everything we've talked about today and all the comments that folks have voiced and shared in the chat will be shared online. And then we'll also share a copy of the PowerPoint slide so folks can download it there.
Terrific.
Yep, and that will all be available in the same location as the draft itself. So anyone who wants to engage after this is welcome to do so in that way.
And I just also want to say from the record, because NPP is depicted as being monstrous and advocating NIMBYism and all kinds of things. And I want to say that our community network is deeply appreciative of the planning department. And folks have been so impressed with the meeting that Joel and others have held at the libraries. And so I don't want it to appear that we think you all are not trying to do your best and not putting forth a good effort. We think what is missing is that the public's voice and the voice of small developers, as was sort of indicated today, has not carried the weight that it should in terms of advancing smart development and in terms of supporting the expertise that is in the planning department. So when we raise issues like this, it's not because we want to smack you guys around. We are trying to get a foothold in the door to say, let's listen to our professionals in the planning department, and let's listen to the small developers that have a lot to bring to this community.
Yeah.
So we're not smacking it.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the feedback no matter what, but that's helpful. Yeah, I think we're I think you're right. I think there are ways in which we can sort of include those voices differently, include those voices better, and
It's
we're always
tough to
looking
do.
for how to do that.
It's
Yeah.
never easy.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, well, thanks so much to everyone who joined us online. Thanks to folks who joined us in person. Feel free to check this out afterward. And we look forward to receiving any other comments that folks have. But with that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you, Wendy, for being our tech expert today. And yeah, we'll just wish folks a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Martina, we can send you the link
Actually.
once it's posted.
Yeah.
So that you